Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson, and I am Courtney Anderson, your very appreciative host for the show. Now today, our topic is in our Help Situation series. So the show today, the topic is Help Situation. How do I respond to direct, brutal, verbal insults and intimidation at work? Let's just one more time. How do I respond to direct, brutal, verbal insults and intimidation at work? This is a show, an episode that even sort of preparing for it, I got a little bit passionate because this is something that's come up so many times over all of the years when I've had the opportunity and the pleasure and the privilege to go out and speak to people at conferences and events around the world. And so often, of course, what I'm focusing on is all of the how can we make it better? How can we surpass our goals? How can we improve things, make it less stressful, and look at some of the business metrics and look at some of our organizational tactics. And there's so much that I do that is on that proactive, very positive focused approach. Yet, there's been a consistent thread throughout all of the time that I've been out working with people around the world trying to help organizations and individuals achieve and surpass their goals. There's been this persistent thread of, okay, fine. I'm ready when the time is right and I'm able to deploy my skills. I'm ready to improve my organization. I'm ready to improve my own personal and professional development. I'm doing all of those wonderful things, and I'm really pleased and thank you. Yet, there's another aspect of life in some settings that is real, and it's not an opportunity for me to surpass my goals. It's not an opportunity for me to, share my joy, and it's not an opportunity for me to be able to do so much of what you share. It's because I'm in a very negative situation, and in some instances, I'm in such a negative situation that I literally am, not just perceive it, but I actually am having to deal with people who are physically intimidating, who are verbally abusive, who are using psychological behavioral tools to thwart not just my success, but even thwart my continued existence at a job or on a contract or in a professional environment. And again, this has come up so many times over the years. And I also have had my own wonderful wealth of experience in life that I know that these types of negative, almost worst-case scenarios, they happen. And unfortunately, they happen more than we like to think. And so when we looked at this topic for the episode, I actually had several other episodes. I was trying to decide which one to go with for this session. And I just sat here, and as I was working through the notes and looking through all my research and files and thinking back over this concept, I realized that this is an extremely important topic. And so I want to clarify a couple of things up front. There are situations that happen more frequently where there's a perception that someone is doing something to harm another person. And so this is more common where someone is in a just sort of average type of experience in life in a professional setting, and they might perceive that there's some sort of intentional action that someone is taking to thwart them or to sabotage them. And as I said, more often than not, these are just misunderstandings, miscommunication, personality clashes. Sometimes we'll get somebody who's an extremely introverted person, and they might not read social cues well, meaning that they don't pick up necessarily on sort of things that are unspoken. There also might be someone who's not just introverted, but they might be someone who might also have some Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder type of situations that do impact the way that they interpret what people do. So what I'm saying is there's sometimes people whose own either personality traits, right, or their own special traits in terms of their own biology and biochemistry may impact the way that they're able to perceive and interpret other people. So that's a legitimate situation that does happen. There are other situations where you just have people who just are so different that it's difficult for them to express each other well and to be heard. That could just be maybe someone who's a very focused person on details, working with someone who is a big picture person. So they might both be genuinely well-intentioned. They might both have very similar goals, but they might actually, just because of the way that they're oriented towards the world, it might be difficult for them to communicate and work together, and then someone in that group or both may begin to perceive that, wait a minute, someone is doing something to harm me. This is an actual threat to my safety. So like I said, in the majority of situations, it is not where there is a legitimate, actual predator who is intentionally seeking out, planning, and deploying techniques intentionally to cause harm to someone else. So I just want to be very clear with that at the outset of this, because I do know from all the wonderful experiences I've had in the world that I've also seen a fair share of misunderstandings, people who probably just don't communicate well together, personality types who aren't going to communicate well together, and sometimes people just have different orientations or different personalities, different communication styles. So that is not what we're talking about. This show is looking at this help situation, and we're talking about someone who is making direct, right? Not something that you're confused, not that you didn't, they didn't say anything, but you just sort of, read something into their body language. This is direct. This is brutal. Verbal insults and intimidation at work. So this is not something where, I'm a big picture person and you're a detail person and we just sort of clash. No, this is not something where I'm an extrovert, meaning typically I draw energy from being around other people, and you're an introvert, typically meaning that you draw energy from being by yourself, and we're just sort of clashing because that's how our energy styles are different. No. And I shared, even putting this show topic together, it was sobering to think about this, because these are the types of situations that are in life that I have made my own professional choices not to spend a disproportionate amount of my time and energy dealing with the worst of the worst, where you really do have someone whose goal is to destroy. It could be to destroy someone's reputation or career. It could be to literally try to inflict all the damage they can on someone's mental health. And those people exist. I've shared in many of other programs that a lot of the things that I've learned that have brought me to I think, overall, a place of contentment in my life in many places is because I did go out and work in a lot of fields where you do deal with the worst of the worst. So when I was a criminal defense attorney, that's a lawyer who represents, as people tell me all the time, the bad guys. I represented people who were the defendants in criminal cases, so they had been charged with, or the government had alleged that they'd done something wrong, and sometimes they hadn't done anything wrong at all. It wasn't them, it was somebody else. There was a misunderstanding, there was, deception or on the part of someone else, or even sometimes there's a rogue person in law enforcement who's not doing what they're supposed to. So that happens, okay? My job, I never perceived it as to defend the, quote, bad guys, because who would want to do that unless I myself thought it was great that people literally, at a very tiny fraction of humans, but they exist, they literally get up and their whole goal is to go out there and destroy. They're going to destroy, again, psychologically, emotionally, physically. They're going to destroy property. And there's nothing else to them. They don't have remorse. They don't feel bad about it. It wasn't because they were going through a hard time. It wasn't because, something sad happened and this is, sort of an anomaly reaction. That's who they are as people for a multitude of reasons. And I'm not a qualified sort of medical professional to explain sort of all the factors that go into creating someone who acts like this, but they do exist, and I saw that when I practiced criminal law. Not that much. The majority of people I had that I worked with were actually wonderful people. Like you and I, we all can have misunderstandings. And again, a lot of the things I did were relatively, although they were allegedly, according to the government, they were, criminal acts. A lot of them were very minor type issues. I did everything from people who, had allegedly were speeding. They were driving too fast. In an area not so fast that they injured anyone or hit anything or caused any damage, but that they were, cited and things of that nature. So I didn't necessarily deal with nothing but really worst case scenarios, but there were a couple of situations there, but more so than the time as a criminal defense attorney, because that actually wasn't the most, I think, demoralizing work I've ever done. I think the more demoralizing area it was dealing with in family law. Family law is when people are going to the legal system for a family issue. So sometimes it's good news. People are they're having an adoption or something joyous like that. I unfortunately didn't do any of those. I unfortunately did what's more common is things have fallen apart or people are very angry, and so they have consequences. People are upset over things regarding the family, maybe a divorce or child custody situation. Or people aren't even married, they don't have children, but maybe they created a family, which we all have the wonderful beauty and right to do. I think that's wonderful. And then for whatever reason, people started to physically attack each other. So there are domestic violence courts. Where I used to practice full time, there was one court that had I believe exclusively, all they did was listening to protective orders and domestic violence cases. And that's where you go to court and you say, government, which is what the courts are, right? We all pay into the system, contributing to society, and then the society pays to have everything in the legal system, from the law enforcement to courthouses, physical, and then all the people that work there, from the clerks up to the judges. And so people go to the government and say, look, something bad's happening. I need the government to help me. I need the government to make this person leave me alone and stop either physically hurting me or verbally threatening me or harassing and intimidating me and things of that nature. And many of these cases are very difficult emotionally because I prefer to be in the sunlight. I prefer to sort of wake up every day and actually today, like most days, I woke up feeling really excited, and I like to prefer to be in the sunlight, meaning that I'm optimistic, I'm energized, I'm looking at how we can make things better, how can we surpass our goals in my own personal life, how can I feel better? And it could be something minor. I went and had a great walk around my neighborhood with my dogs. I feel awesome. So I prefer to live in sort of that part of the spectrum of things, but I've been to the more, as I said, demoralizing parts of the world where there's not a lot of sunlight, meaning there's not a lot of warmth and optimism and joy because really awful, horrible things are happening. So I'm approaching this topic from the perspective of, honestly, the worst case scenario, that is extremely rare. So again, the overwhelming majority of situations where people tell me or share with me, oh my goodness, this place is horrible, my coworker's a horrible person, they're trying to destroy me. Typically when we get into the details, it turns out, okay, yeah, I can see that there's some personality or value conflicts, I can see that there's some work style differences, I can see that there might be communication style differences, but the person's not here to destroy you. In this episode, I am validating the existence of people who really do wake up in the morning and they're, I don't know what the word is, I don't want to use a pleasure, but they derive satisfaction at some level from inflicting pain. And they inflict pain on other people. They inflict pain on themselves too. And of course, by inflicting pain on others, you also are inflicting pain on yourselves because of all the repercussions and all of the additional stress, shall we say, of doing so. But that's a real thing, and that's what I wanted to talk about, and that's why the health situation isn't, how do I get along with difficult people? Okay? Now, that's a very common topic. I've done, thousands of hours of training and speaking on that because it's so common, because we all think everybody else is difficult. So many people think I'm difficult because I work the way I do, and I, do what I do in the way of how I do things on time and how I communicate. And then there are other people that I think are difficult. We all think a lot of other people are difficult just simply because they're different, right? Because that's all we're talking about, really, is differences. That is not what this is about. This episode is about the minuscule, tiny, I don't know how many different, descriptions I can use. This is not something that you will probably ever experience in your life. But I just wanted to have a highlight and talk about it on an episode because it is real and people do reach out to me. There are people who are predators. And what do I mean by that? They are out in society, either physically in society or they're in society now, maybe in cyberspace, online. They're just interacting externally. So they're not just sitting somewhere by themselves. We're not talking about someone like the Unabomber who for long periods of time would sit in a cabin literally outside of society with no electricity and no interaction with other people, and then go interact with society just to try to harm people and literally to kill people. So that's a predator, right? It wasn't like, I was having a nice day and I was, out and I was running errands and then, accidentally, I ran over a stop sign and now I've, been cited by the police. That's not the same type of situation. Yes, harm came from that. But that's not the same as somebody whose intention is almost entirely, right, to inflict pain. And they exist and they're real. So all of that is to try to stop everyone from listening and thinking, oh my goodness, that's me. This is the most horrible situation. This is so rare. Most of us in our lives, thankfully, never encounter these predators because they're little teeny tiny percentages of our overall human population, but they are out there. So in this spotlight, I'm integrating this show and some other shows that we're doing into what we're calling the Mental Self-Defense Arts. And the Mental Self-Defense Arts is exactly what it sounds like. Just like if you were interested in a self-defense class, you would go out, and I've taken these actually and really found them to be incredibly helpful, where knowledgeable instructors will help teach you about different types of self-defense. And it's great. They have them for young children and young people. They have them for mature people like myself. They have them for people who of all ages and backgrounds. And so I definitely recommend you look into a physical self-defense class. It never hurts, and you learn some good things, and especially from a lot of the really great teachers out there. Okay. This series is about what do you do, how do you respond when there's a direct, brutal, verbal insult and intimidation at work. My argument is that there's a self-defense art, just like there is a physical self-defense art. This is your mental self-defense. And what you need to do is understand and accept, as I've laid out here for the whole first section of the show, these people exist. When you really encounter one, it's not your imagination. You're not being, quote, too sensitive. It's not a misunderstanding. You have to trust your instincts and accept and understand that when you are, unfortunately, encountering one of these individuals and they have determined that you look like a good victim, it's not time then for you to pull the wool over your eyes and pretend like people like this don't exist. And as I've shared, most of us in our lives never, ever encounter people like this. Thank goodness. And most of us, even in our professional lives, don't encounter people like this. Some people who might work in certain types of jobs may see more of these types of people. So someone who might work in the legal system or someone who might work in some of these areas might see more of these types of people because they might end up in those settings. But most of us are never going to really encounter this. But when we do, here we go. When we look at self-defense, remember, this is the time to be assertive. This is the time when the self matters. So I know that a lot of people try to put themselves last, right? So, I want to please other people. I want to make sure I don't offend anyone. I want to do the right thing. And that's wonderful in most settings. But part of what we're going to do is try to understand in a very broad oversimplified. I know this is oversimplified, but for people who get caught up in this and become a victim, it typically is because they didn't understand exactly what was happening. So I've tried to explain that this is very rare, but when it does occur, you must trust your instincts. There are two parts of self-defense. The biggest part of self-defense, of course, just like whether it's physical or mental or emotional, psychological, is the prevention and the mitigation, right? So the prevention is, there's someone out there in society, they're in a parking lot of a shopping center, they're thinking, I want to go rob somebody. That's what I'm here about. I'm going to go cause harm. I'm going to inflict pain. I'm going to literally physically take their things and maybe hurt them. And I'm also, since I'm stealing from them, of course, they'll have economic pain, but that's what they're doing. So looking around for victims. There's a ton of research and a lot of really good resources to help you understand that, how people who are engaging in these sort of habitual, systemic predatory behaviors, how they assess situations, and that it is not typically unplanned. So this isn't somebody who, everything was going well in their lives, and then, oh my goodness, horrible things happened. They had a bad divorce. They they started abusing, alcohol, and now they're, just have hit rock bottom, and they're, and they're in a really bad situation, and they find themselves, stealing from their loved ones. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone who has a habit and a history and a pattern. And what people who are predators do, remember, the goal is to inflict pain. So they need someone to inflict pain on. And they're out, like I was trying to explain, in the parking lot, just like someone looking around the parking lot. They're looking for the best victim, right? Because just like anything else, if you think about it, it makes sense. If I'm going to go out to eat Italian food, I'm going to sit around and think, what's the best place to go? I'm going to look online and see what the best restaurant around here that's an Italian restaurant is. I want to go to have the best experience, right? That's probably not a great analogy, but to the best of my understanding, it works somewhat like that with people who want to inflict pain. So they're in a parking lot, they're looking around, who looks like they're not paying attention, maybe moving slowly, has their wallet, a lot of gentlemen will have their wallet maybe in the back of their pants, sort of hanging out of their back pocket, or maybe someone who has a bag and has their wallet or money sort of sticking out of their bag and the zipper's open. That's an easier looking victim, right? Because they want to get over there, get it done quickly, get what they need, and get out. And they're looking around. So just like you do a lot to prevent them from picking you, right? So you make sure I'm not having, money sort of sticking out of my pants pocket or my bag, and I'm, eyes up, all about being attentive to your surroundings, right? There's so much in these self-defense programs. It's not even about the part about when someone attacks you, because that's the worst case scenario, and that happens very rarely. It's about preventing it, It's about, do you have your eyes open? Do you have your ears open? Are you paying attention? Is there somebody over there in that corner that looks kind of weird, that corner of the parking lot, they look kind of weird? And here's the most important thing. And I when I was putting this together, I went and I said, what's that book I really love? And I read it years ago originally, and I went and found it on my bookshelf. And so it's The Gift of Fear. So it's by Gavin DeBecker, and it's The Gift of Fear. And it's, this is the old version of it, but it's just a really succinct book, and it helps you kind of think through a lot of this, but it's all about, again, we're going to not sit here and pretend like there aren't people like this in the world. We're going to put our, rose-colored glasses aside, and we're going to deal with the fact that sometimes these situations are real. And so one of the things that's underscored in that book, and so many others, but that's just one that I would recommend, is trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. You must trust your instincts. There are so many times, I know for me and everyone, right? You're out somewhere, you're walking around, and somebody looks just something off. You can just feel something. You're just looking, and you don't know that person. They're not even really doing anything. They might be pretty far away, but you're just not getting a good feeling. And so you head down a different, path, and you just get out of their way. Right? You have got to trust your instincts. And so specifically in that book, The Gift of Fear, it has some sobering examples of people who, something very violent and horrible happened, and then when they're being interviewed, at first they'll say something like, I never would have thought, that person had done that, or it didn't seem like they were that kind of person, but they say something like, well, I did get a kind of a feeling. And that's what that author and many others are trying to beg us to do. Pay attention. And part of, I think, sometimes why these types of discussions are difficult for people is it's sort of predicated on the idea that, we are organisms. And that's not a negative thing. I mean, we're awesome organisms. We have opposable thumbs and we can do all kind of wonderful things, but we are organisms. And so there's a lot of the ability that we don't use as much in the way that we live in modern life, but we are organisms. So the instincts are telling us something, so use them. And just like in a parking lot or somewhere, you feel like, oh, that person, I don't know what's going on over there, or it looks, or those people shouting, or somebody moving a little too closely, and you just move a different way or go in a different place, or, that's using your instincts. And yes, might you have overreacted? Yes. Might somebody say that you were rude? Why did you do that? I'd rather have that happen than have some sort of misunderstanding where people put themselves at risk unnecessarily. I don't tell this anecdote that much at all, but I was a little kid and I can't remember what grade I was in, but my father was in the military here in the U.S., and so that meant that at the time I grew up that we moved a lot. So we moved every couple of years, like every 2 or 3 years on average, sometimes a little less, sometimes we didn't ever stay anywhere more than 3 years when I was growing up. So move all over. And it's exciting because you get to see the world and learn so much about different people. So I think I was living in Kentucky. I'm pretty sure I was living in Kentucky. I was young. I was a child. I was in school. And so it was the end of the school day, and so a car comes up, and there's a lady in the car, and she's telling me that my parents had told her to come pick me up, and that I was going to ride home with her, and that she was, that they had told her, come get me, and that she was the one that was supposed to take me home. And I didn't feel that I knew this lady. Now, she was saying, to the best of my recollection, all the right things. That your parents, named so-and-so, said, hey, can you pick up Courtney? But I just didn't get the feeling, and I didn't trust her. And to the best of my recollection, my parents and other adults sort of laughed about how, you wouldn't get in the car. I refused to get in the car. I did not get in the car at all. And the person had left the school, and eventually my parents got me and sort of told the story. It's sort of, oh, it's so funny, but you wouldn't get in the car at all. I wouldn't even go close to the car. And it's interesting because I have all these media stories that I've seen in recent years of young children and sort of going out to sort of show parents and caregivers how young children can still have someone sort of lure them, right, to get in a car, or, hey, I've got candy, or my parent, your parents asked me to come get you, and that, that's not something that's a myth, but that does happen, and unfortunately it's still pretty effective. And a lot of what they're doing in a lot of those media shows is to try, and I do think there's some legitimate reason, of course they want ratings, but I think what they're also trying to do at some level is remind people, you have to teach, your loved ones and young people in your world that you can't just trust people. Not all of them, not all the time. And it's better that, my perspective would be that it's better that they're a little bit rude, as I just gave my, real life little anecdote that it was so funny, I wouldn't get in the car, but that's who I am. And yes, it was, inappropriate because it was someone that my parents had sent to pick me up, but I'd rather have that happen than somebody to ignore their instincts and end up in a very difficult situation where their life really is at risk. So here we are, moving toward the end of this show, which is how do I respond to direct, brutal, verbal insults and intimidation at work? And it's going to have to be a 2-part episode at this point. But as I was putting together the content, as I was working through this in this half hour, I think the points I've made are imperative to be able to move to the second part, which is how do you respond? What do you do? What do you say? Do you cry? Do you go on the offensive? What's effective? What isn't? So this will be the wrap up of part 1. I'm going to go ahead then and schedule part 2. And in part 2, we'll talk about what do you do, how do you respond. Here in part 1, I appreciate you joining me. You can always come and read more of the show descriptions, notes, any follow-ups that I'll post on my website, CourtneyAnderson.com. And again, these are very rare situations. I'm sure it probably won't happen to you, but just in case, it's good information every once in a while to explore this. Thank you so much for listening today.